Nah, they thought she was just a ghost in an apron. Sienna, the timid waitress who never made eye contact and trembled when she poured the wine. But the night Don Salvatore, the ruthless patriarch of the Sicilian mob, walked into his son's restaurant, the silence was deafening. He insulted the chef, terrified the staff, and spat on the floor, speaking a dialect so ancient and specific that even his own son couldn't calm him. Then Sienna stepped forward. She didn't stutter. She spoke 6 words in a dialect that hadn't been heard outside of a specific village in Palermo for 30 years. The Don didn't just stop yelling. He froze, and the gun in his bodyguard's hand lowered. Who was she really? And why did the most dangerous man in New York suddenly look at a waitress like he had seen a ghost? The distinct clatter of a fork hitting a bone china plate echoed through the dining room of Il Cielo, a sound sharp enough to make Sienna flinch. She stood in the shadows near the kitchen swing doors, clutching a silver water pitcher like a shield. Il Cielo wasn't just a restaurant. Situated on East 65th Street in Manhattan, it was a fortress of wealth, wrapped in velvet curtains and the scent of truffle oil. It was also the crown jewel of the Moretti family empire. To the public, the Mortys were legitimate businessmen, importers of fine olive oil and textiles. To the staff and anyone who read the crime blotters, they were royalty of a different kind. Lorenzo Moretti, the owner, sat at table 1, the corner booth permanently reserved for him. Even from across the room, he radiated a gravitational pull that made the air feel heavier. He was 32, wearing a charcoal Brioni suit that cost more than Sienna's entire year of rent in Queens. He was handsome in a way that felt dangerous, sharp jawline, eyes the color of espresso, and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow that suggested he hadn't always sat in boardrooms. Sienna, the maitre d', verify a nervous man named Arthur, hissed, "Table 4 needs water. Go. And for God's sake, don't drop anything tonight. The boss is in a mood." Sienna nodded, her messy bum bobbing. "Yes, Arthur." She moved across the floor with the practiced invisibility of someone who spent a lifetime trying not to be seen. That was her superpower, blending into the wallpaper. In a city like New York, being a ghost was safe. Being noticed was dangerous. She approached table 4, pouring the sparkling water with a steady hand, despite her racing heart. As she turned, she caught Lorenzo's gaze. He wasn't looking at her, not really. He was scanning the room, his eyes acting like security cameras, analyzing threats, exits, and liabilities. To him, she was just furniture. That was exactly how she wanted it. "He's coming," a voice whispered near the bar. It was Luca, Lorenzo's right-hand man and head of security. He was built like a vending machine and had a thicker neck than most people had. Thighs. Lorenzo stood up, buttoning his jacket. The casual elegance vanished, replaced by a rigid military tension. "How far out?" 2 minutes. The convoy just passed Park Avenue. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted instantly. The casual chatter of the diners seemed to dim. The waiters straightened their ties. The kitchen staff, usually a chaotic symphony of shouting, went silent. Sienna retreated to her safe zone near the service station. She knew who was coming. Everyone did. It was the reason the reservation book had been cleared for the next 2 hours. Don Salvatore Moretti was arriving. The capo di tutti capi, the boss of bosses. He had been in semi-retirement in Sicily for the last 5 years, living in a fortress near Corleone. His return to New York wasn't a vacation, it was an audit. And rumor had it, he wasn't happy with how his son Lorenzo was modernizing the family business. "Sienna," Arthur whispered, sweating profusely now, "you're on the antipasti station. If the Don wants bread, if he wants oil, you bring oil. Do not speak in Slesdogen. Do not look him in the eye. Do you understand?" "I understand," she whispered. But as she gripped the tray, a cold dread settled in her stomach. It wasn't fear of the mob boss that made her hands cold. It was something else, a secret she had buried under a fake last name and hair dye. If Don Salvatore was really from the old country, from the deep, rural heart of Sicily, he might recognize things that Americans missed. He might hear the rhythm in her silence. The front door swung open, not by a doorman, but by 2 men in dark trench coats who swept the room with terrifying efficiency. Then he entered. Don Salvatore was smaller than Sienna expected. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, leaning heavily on a cane made of polished black wood, topped with a silver wolf's head. He wore a heavy wool coat and a flat cap, looking more like a grandfather returning from a market than a man who had ordered hits on 3 continents. But his eyes, they were shark eyes, dead, black, and unblinking. Lorenzo stepped forward, bowing his head slightly, a sign of respect, not submission. "Papa, welcome." Salvatore didn't smile. He looked at his son, then at the modern decor of the restaurant. Io's restaurant, the abstract art, the gold lighting, the fusion menu on the stand. He sneered. "Schifo," Salvatore muttered. "Disgusting." He walked past his son, ignoring the hand Lorenzo offered, and sat at the head of the large table prepared for him. The entourage, 6 men, including Luca, scrambled to take their places. The tension was suffocating. Arthur, the maitre d' rushed over with a bottle of wine. It was a 1998 Sicilian, a super Tuscan red worth thousands. "For you, Don Moretti," Arthur said, his voice trembling. "The finest vintage." Salvatore looked at the bottle, then up at Arthur. He waved his hand dismissively. "Aceto," he rasped. "Vinegar. Get it away from me." Arthur froze, pale as a sheet. "I can bring the Barolo, sir." "I want wine from my earth." Salvatore slammed his hand on the table. "Where is the Nero d'Avola? Where is the wine that tastes like blood and dirt? You give me this French pretending garbage." He was speaking Italian, but with a thick, heavy accent. It wasn't the standard Italian taught in schools. It was Sicilian, but a rough coastal variation. Lorenzo stepped in, his jaw tight. "Papa, please, this is New York. We serve the best global wines here." "Global," Salvatore mocked. "You forget who you are, Lorenzo. You wear the suits of a Milanese banker. You sell olive oil like a tourist. You have forgotten the taste of respect." The dinner went downhill from there. The chef, a renowned figure in the culinary world, sent out a plate of deconstructed lasagna. Salvatore took one look at it and threw the plate against the wall. The crash of china shattered the silence of the restaurant. "This is not food," Salvatore roared, standing up, his cane shaking. "This is an insult. I come 4,000 miles to see my son, and he feeds me baby food." Lorenzo slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. You are embarrassing me." "I embarrass you." Salvatore laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "You embarrass the name Morty." The Don't began to cough, a deep, hacking fit that shook his small frame. He slumped back into his chair, wheezing. One of his bodyguards handed him water, but he swatted it away. He began ranting, faster now, his voice dropping into a dialect so deep and guttural that the other men at the table looked confused. Even Lorenzo looked lost. He understood Italian, and he understood Sicilian, but Salvatore was slipping into something else, an old, rural dialect from the mountains near Prizzi. It was a language of shepherds and smugglers, filled with idioms that had died out decades ago. "He's asking for something," Luca whispered to Lorenzo. "I think he wants medicine or a specific drink. I can't understand him when he gets like this." Lorenzo hissed, frustration radiating off him. "He's speaking the old tongue. He's delirious." Salvatore was pointing at his chest, his face red, shouting a word that sounded like Amaro Dusuli. "He wants Amaro," Arthur suggested weakly. "Bring the Fernet." Sienna stood by the wall, watching. "Tizia, mossed very." Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew exactly what he was saying. She knew exactly what he wanted. Amaro Dusuli. It wasn't a brand. It wasn't Fernet Branca. It was a folk remedy, a specific mixture of hot water, lemon, bay leaf, and honey, often called bitters of the sun in the tiny villages south of Palermo. It was what grandmothers gave you when the travel sickness took your breath away. If she stayed silent, the old man have a stroke right there. If she stepped forward, she exposed herself. The Don's face was turning purple. He was gasping, clutching his chest, shouting the phrase over and over, his fury turning into panic. Lorenzo looked helpless. For the first time, the powerful boss looked like a scared boy who couldn't help his father. Sienna took a breath. "Don't do it, Sienna. Stay a ghost." But her legs were already moving. She walked past the terrified Arthur. She walked past the hulking security guards who reached for their jackets as she approached. She walked right up to the head of the table. Lorenzo stood up to block her. "Not now, Sienna. Get back." Sienna ignored him. She looked straight at the wheezing, furious old man. "You Sulicala, Don Salvatore. Respiri, Cianu." "The sun sets, Don Salvatore." "Breathe slowly, Cala. Don Salvatore." "Respiri, Cianu." "The sun sets, Don Salvatore." "Breathe slowly." It was the Prizzi dialect, spoken with a specific cadence of the Western Mountains. The room went dead silent. Don Salvatore stopped coughing. His head snapped up. He stared at the girl in the cheap waitress uniform, his black eyes widening. Sienna didn't flinch. She kept her voice low, melodious and firm. "Voulez-vous canarino, cuso scorza di limoni, eloru?" "Do you want the canary tea?" "With the lemon peel and the bay leaf." Salvatore stared at her for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. The rage slowly drained from his face, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment. "Ku si tu?" "Who, how?" he whispered, the menace gone. "Sugnu suluna sera cavoli serviri." "I am just a servant who wants to serve," Sienna replied in the dialect. Salvatore leaned back, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. He looked at Lorenzo, then pointed a gnarled finger at Sienna. "Sienna?" Sugar said, switching back to broken English so the room could Sienna. "This one." Salvatore said. "Everyone else get out." Lorenzo looked at Sienna as if he was seeing her for the first time. The invisibility spell was broken, and in the dangerous world of the Morettis, being seen was the first step toward trouble. The dining room cleared faster than a burning building. Within 3 minutes, the only people left were Don Salvatore, Lorenzo, Luca, the head of security, and Sienna stood with her hands clasped in front of her apron. She could feel Lorenzo's eyes boring into the side of her face. It was an intense, calculating heat. "Go to the kitchen," Salvatore commanded, his voice raspy but controlled now. "Make the, how you say, canarino." Sienna nodded and turned on her heel. "Wait." Lorenzo's voice was like a whip crack. Sienna froze. She turned slowly. Lorenzo walked around the table, closing the distance between them. Up close, he smelled of expensive tobacco and cedarwood. He towered over her, his presence overwhelming. "You've worked here for 6 months, Lorenzo said quietly. "I've seen your file. Sienna Rossi, born in Ohio, parents from Cleveland." Sienna swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "They speak Prizzi dialect in Cleveland?" Lorenzo asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. "Because that wasn't Italian you just spoke. That was a dialect even I struggle to follow. A dialect my father hasn't heard since he left the old country in '95. "My grandmother," Sienna lied quickly. It was a rehearsed lie, one she kept in her back pocket. "She was from Sicily. She raised me. She refused to speak English in the house." "Which village?" Salvatore asked from the table. He was watching her like a hawk now. Sienna hesitated. This was the trap. If she names the wrong village, the accent wouldn't match. If she names the right one, they might know her family. "Forlean," she said softly. It was close enough to Prizzi to explain the accent, but big enough to be vague. Salvatore grunted. "Corleone, a place of ghosts." He waved his hand. "Go, make the tea. Don't put too much sugar." Sienna fled to the kitchen. As soon as the swing doors closed, she leaned against the stainless steel counter, exhaling a shaky breath. Her hands were trembling so badly she had to grip the edge of the sink. "You idiot," she scolded herself. "You just painted a target on your back." She grabbed a lemon and began peeling it with a knife, trying to steady her nerves. She needed hot water, a bay leaf, and a piece of lemon rind. It was a simple digestive, but to a Sicilian traditionalist like Salvatore, it was a piece of home. Behind her, the kitchen doors swung open again. She expected Arthur, or maybe one of the bussers. Instead, she heard the heavy, deliberate footsteps of expensive leather shoes. She turned around. Lorenzo was there. He was alone. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. The kitchen was empty. The staff had been dismissed to the back alley for a smoke break while the dawn decided their fate. "Stop lying, Sienna," Lorenzo said. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was curious, and that was worse. "I'm not lying, Mr. Moretti. My grandmother—" "I checked your employment application just now on my phone," Lorenzo interrupted. "You listed your grandmother as Marie Smith from Dayton. No mention of Sicily. No mention of bilingual skills. In fact, under languages, you checked English only." He pushed off the doorframe and walked toward her. He moved with a predator's grace, silent and assured. He stopped inches from her, trapping her against the prep counter. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Because normal waitresses don't know the dialect of the inner circle, and they certainly don't look at my father, a man who scares prime ministers without blinking." Sienna looked up at him. She saw the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. For a moment, the air between them crackled. It wasn't just fear, it was chemistry, a raw, undeniable pull. "I just wanted to help," she whispered. "You didn't help," Lorenzo said, reaching out. His fingers brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, sending a shiver down her spine. "You intrigued him, and you intrigued me. Do you know how dangerous that is? I can quit," she said quickly. "I'll leave tonight." Lorenzo chuckled. A dark, low sound. "Quit? No, Bella. You don't get to walk away now. My father just requested that you serve his table for the duration of his stay in New York." Sienna's blood ran cold. "What? You're not a waitress anymore, Sienna," Lorenzo said, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. "You're the only person in the city that Don trusts to bring him dinner, which means you belong to me now." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a dinner, "which means you belong to me now." He leaned in closer. "And I'm going to find out exactly who taught you to speak like a gangster's daughter." The following afternoon, Sienna didn't report to Il Cielo. Instead, a black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows pulled up to the curb of her rundown apartment building in Queens. Luca was at the wheel. He didn't knock, he simply tested her outside. 2 minutes. Sienna grabbed a small duffel bag she kept packed for emergencies. It contained her passport, $3,000 in cash, and a burner phone. She had always known a day might come when she had to run. She just never expected the getaway car to belong to the people she was supposed to be running from. When she slid into the back seat, the air conditioning was blasting, chilling the sweat on her skin. Lorenzo was sitting there, absorbed in an iPad, reviewing spreadsheets. He didn't look up as the car pulled away from the curb, merging into the traffic heading toward Long Island. The silence in the car was thick enough to choke on. Sienna sat rigidly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, staring ahead. She felt the weight of Lorenzo's presence beside her, the scent of his expensive cologne, the sheer quiet power he projected without moving a muscle. "Where are we going?" she finally ventured, her voice a little hoarse. Lorenzo scrolled down on the iPad. "My father doesn't like hotels. Too many variables. Too many eyes. We are staying at the family estate in the Hamptons for the duration of his visit. And I am just supposed to come." Now we turned to look at her. In the daylight, his eyes were even darker, unfathomable pools that seemed to absorb the light. "You are his Botanti now, Sienna. His caregiver. He asked for you this morning before he even asked for coffee. He won't take his heart medication unless the girl with the voice of the mountains gives it to him." Lorenzo's tone was dry, laced with a cynicism that masked a deeper frustration. "Congratulations. You've achieved in 24 hours what most captains in my organization haven't achieved in 20 years. You have the Dawn's ear." "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "Intent is irrelevant. Results are what matter." He leaned closer, his knee brushing hers. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her. "But be warned, Bivala. My father is sentimental about the old country, but he is not soft. If he senses you are playing him, the nostalgia will vanish, and you will be left with the monster. The estate was a sprawling gated fortress on the ocean in Southampton. High hedges obscured the view from the road, and cameras were visible on every corner of the 10-foot stone walls. It was beautiful, immaculate, and utterly terrifying. It was a gilded cage. Upon arrival, Sienna was shown to a guest room that was larger than her entire apartment. It overlooked the Atlantic, decorated in creams and blues. On the bed lay Tuileries blacked boxes. She opened them. Inside were clothes, tailored silk blouses, charcoal trousers, a cashmere cardigan, and sensible but expensive leather flats. No more polyester waitress uniforms. This was the uniform of a high-end personal assistant, chosen by someone with impeccable taste. Lorenzo? She changed, feeling like an imposter in the luxurious fabrics. When she went downstairs, she found Don Salvatore on the massive stone patio, staring out at the churning gray ocean. He looked smaller today, wrapped in a thick blanket despite the mild weather. Veni, he murmured without turning around. Come here, Sienna approached slowly. Don Salvatore, can I get you anything? He gestured to the chair beside him. Sit. No serving now, just sit. She sat down gingerly on the edge of the teat chair. The air here, it is too thin, Salvatore said, his voice raspy. It smells only of money, not salt. In Sicily, the sea's alive. It smells only of money, not salt. In Sicily, the seal. He turned his shark-like eyes on her. The malice from the night before was gone, replaced by a piercing curiosity. My son, Lorenzo, he thinks he is smart. He builds businesses. He makes politicians rich, so they look the other way. He is a king of spreadsheets. Salvatore spat on the stone pavers, but he does not know people. He does not smell the rot inside them. Sienna stayed silent, knowing any word could be a landmine. You, Salvatore continued, leaning closer, his breath smelling of anise and old age. You smell of fear, but underneath the fear, something else, something hard, like flint. He suddenly reached out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was shockingly strong, his fingers like iron bands. He turned her hand over, looking at her palm, then up at her face. Tell me the truth, girl. Who taught you the old words? Who taught you the little words? My grandmother, Sienna repeated the lie, her heart hammering. Marie. Salvatore chuckled darkly and released her wrist. Lies! You speak the dialect of the Western Hills! Prissy! Corleone! The places where the shadows are long. No Marie from Ohio speaks like that. He leaned back, closing his eyes. It does not matter today. Today you bring me peace. You remind me of a time when things were simple, when enemies were in front of you, not smiling in boardrooms. He dozed off. Sienna remained frozen in the chair, watching the most dangerous man in the hemisphere sleep like a baby. From the second-floor balcony above, Lorenzo watched them. He held a tumbler of whiskey, the ice melting. He saw his father, the unyielding tyrant, softened by the presence of a waitress. And he saw the waitress poised, terrified, and infinitely mysterious. He had already put his best investigator on her. Diana Rossi identity was flawless on the surface, tax records going back 5 years, but before that, a void. It was too clean. It was a construct. He watched the wind blow a strand of hair across her face. He felt that pull again, that dangerous gravitational force. He wanted to know her secrets. He wanted to break down that wall of timid obedience and see the flint his father talked about. And God help him, he wanted her in his bed. 3 days into their stay at the Hamptons estate, the tension was a physical weight in the air. Don Salvatore's mood swung violently between nostalgic melancholy and tyrannical rage. Only Sienna could talk him down from the ledges of his temper. She had become indispensable, mixing his herbal teas, reading Italian newspapers to him, and sitting in silence when he needed to brood. Lorenzo hated it. He hated losing control of his father, and he hated the growing obsession he felt for Sienna. He found himself creating reasons to be near her, watching her move through the house. They had developed a silent, charged, dynamic a dance of predator and prey where the roles seemed to shift constantly. On the third night, Lorenzo hosted a small dinner. It was unavoidable. 3 high-ranking associates from the New Jersey faction needed FaceTime with the legendary Don. The dinner was held in the formal dining room under a massive crystal chandelier. Sienna was instructed by Salvatore not to wear her uniform, but a simple black dress he had ordered for her. It was modest, high-necked, and long-sleeved, yet it clung to her figure in a way that made it impossible for Lorenzo to look away. Salvatore insisted she sit at the table to the left of him, placing her above the made men from Jersey. It was a calculated insult to them, a demonstration of his absolute power to elevate whoever he chose. The Jersey boss, a thick-necked man named Sal Varney, looked at Sienna with open disdain. Don Salvatore, with all due respect, since when do we break bread with the help? Salvatore didn't even look up from his soup. The help? This girl has more Sicilian blood in her little finger than you have in your entire fat body, Varney. She stays. The dinner continued in tense silence. Lorenzo sat opposite Sienna, his eyes frequently darting to her. She ate methodically, her eyes downcast, playing the role of the meek servant perfectly. But Lorenzo noticed things. He noticed how she held her knife, not like a diner, but like a tool. He noticed how she never sat with her back completely to a door. He noticed how she never sat with her back completely to a door. He noticed how, whenever a waiter entered the room, her muscles tensed almost imperceptibly beneath the black silk. The attack happened during the espresso course. There was no warning siren, just a sudden, muted thwomp from the front lawn, followed by the shattering of the large bay window at the far end of the dining room. Glass exploded inward. A canister tear gas skidded across the polished hardwood floor, hissing and spewing white smoke. Chaos erupted. Varney and his men dove under the table, shouting. Luca and the 2 other bodyguards in the room immediately drew their weapons, moving to cover Lorenzo and Salvatore. "Get the Don down!" Lorenzo roared, flipping the heavy oak table onto its side to create a barricade. He grabbed his father, pulling the confused old man toward the floor. Through the broken window, 3 figures dressed in black tactical gear and ski masks vaulted into the room, carrying suppressed submachine guns. The smoke was thick, stinging eyes and throats. Shots rang out sharp cracks as Luca returned fire. One of the intruders dropped. Lorenzo, adrenaline flooding his system, drew his own sidearm from his shoulder holster. He peered over the edge of the overturned table. 2 assailants left. One was engaging Luca. The other was moving around the flank, aiming directly for where Salvatore was crouched. Lorenzo started to move to intercept, but he was half a second too slow. The gunman had a clear line of sight on the old Don. Then a blur of black silk moved through the smoke. Sienna? She didn't cower. She moved with terrifying speed and economy of motion. She had been near the sideboard when the window broke. As the flanking gunman stepped past her, focused on Salvatore, Sienna grabbed a heavy silver candelabra. She didn't swing it wildly. With surgical precision, she drove the heavy base of the candelabra into the gunman's wrist, shattering the bone. He screamed, dropping his weapon inside his guard. It was a move of pure, trained aggression. She drove an elbow into his solar plexus, doubling him over, and followed with a knee to the face that sounded like a melon cracking. The man crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The entire exchange took 4 seconds. Sienna stood over him, breathing hard. The silver candelabra gripped tightly in a hand that was no longer trembling. Her hair had come loose from its bun, framing a face that was transformed. The meekness was gone. Her eyes were blazing with cold, lethal intensity. The last intruder saw his partner drop and turned to run back out the window, but Luca dropped him with 2 shots to the back. Silence returned to the dining room, broken only by the hissing of the dying gas canister and Salvatore's wheezing coughs. The bodyguards swarmed the room, securing the exits. Lorenzo stood slowly, his gun lowered. He ignored Varney whimpering under the table. He ignored his father. He only had eyes for Sienna. She stood amidst the broken glass and smoke, looking like an avenging angel. She dropped the candelabra. It clattered loudly on the floor. She looked up and met Lorenzo's gaze across the overturned table. The game was up. The mask wasn't just slipped, it was shattered into a million pieces on the dining room floor. Lorenzo walked toward her, his face a mask of fury and awe. He stopped inches from her, ignoring the blood on the floor from the man she had neutralized. "Who?" he whispered, his voice vibrating with restrained violence. "Are you really?" Sienna straightened her spine. She didn't look down this time. "Does it matter? I just saved your father's life. It matters more than anything else in the world right now," Lorenzo snarled. He grabbed her arm not gently this time. "Luca, take Varney and his trash out. Clean this up. Secure the grounds." He pulled Sienna toward the library doors. "You, with me. Now. Mel." The library smelled of old leather and gun smoke clinging to their clothes. Lorenzo threw the heavy oak double doors shut and locked them. He didn't yell. The coldness of his rage was far more terrifying. He walked to the antique Globe bar, poured a stiff scotch, drank it in one swallow, and turned to face her. Sienna stood in the center of the Persian rug. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. She knew this moment was coming. In a way, she was relieved. "Krav Maga?" Lorenzo asked, his voice devoid of emotion. "Or Systema, the way you broke his wrist that was Russian military?" "A mix," Sienna said calmly. Her voice was different now, deeper, stripping away the fake American timidity. In the dialect, the prizzy cadence, "It wasn't your grandmother, no." Lorenzo walked slowly around her, circling her like a shark inspecting wounded prey. "My investigator found a ghost in the system today." A social security number for Sienna Rossi that belonged to a girl who died in a car crash in Ohio 8 years ago? "You're a phantom?" He stopped in front of her, his dark eyes boring into hers. "Give me a name, a real one, before I hand you over to Luca in the basement." Sienna looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the man behind the expensive suit, the burden of legacy, the intelligence, the loneliness, and the undeniable heat that had been building between them since that first night at Il Cielo. She had come here to hate him. It would have been so much easier if she still did. "Alessia," she whispered. "Alessia D'Agostino." Lorenzo froze. The name hung in the air between them like a declaration of war. The D'Agostinos, 20 years ago, they were the only family in Sicily powerful enough to challenge the Mortese. It had been a bloody, brutal conflict known as the Palermo Purge. Don Salvatore had ended it decisively. He had wiped out the entire male line of the D'Agostino clan in a single night of coordinated hits. "Impossible!" Lorenzo breathed. "They are all dead! My father burned their estate to the ground!" "He missed one," Sienna Alicia said, her voice trembling slightly with old rage. "I was 6 years old. My mother hid me in a dumbwaiter shaft while your father's men kicked down the doors. I heard the shots. I smelled the smoke." She stepped closer to him, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. "An uncle in Chicago took me in. He changed my name. He raised me with one purpose, remembrance. He taught me the old dialect so I wouldn't forget where I came from. He hired ex-Mossad agents to teach me how to fight, how to blend in, how to become a ghost." Lorenzo looked stunned. The pieces clicked into place. The timidity, the invisibility, was the ultimate camouflage for an assassin. "So what was the plan, Alessia?" Lorenzo asked, his voice rough. "Get close to the old man, poison his herbal tea, slip a knife between his ribs while you read him the newspaper?" "Yes," she admitted. "That was the plan for 10 years, waiting for him to come to America, waiting for my moment." "Why didn't you?" Lorenzo demanded, stepping closer, his energy manic now. "You had 50 chances in the last 3 days. He trusts you." "You could have ended the great Don Salvatore with a pillow over his face." "I don't know," she cried out, the facade cracking. She paced away from him, running a hand through her messy hair. "When I saw him at the restaurant, he wasn't the monster under my bed anymore. He was just a sad, sick old man coughing up blood, crying for a home he can never go back to." I hesitated, and then she stopped, turning to face Lorenzo. Her chest was heaving, and then what Lorenzo pressed. And then I met his son. The admission hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. Lorenzo stared at her. She was the daughter of his father's greatest enemy. She was a weapon honed for decades to destroy his family. By all the laws of their world, he should put a bullet in her head right here on the Persian rug. It was mandatory. It was mandatory. It was survival. But when he looked at her fierce, broken, and incredibly beautiful in her defiance, he knew he couldn't do it. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He grabbed the lapels of her black dress, pulling her roughly against him. "You are supposed to be my death," he growled against her lips. "I know," she whispered back, her hands gripping the fabric of his shirt. "Then kill me, Alicia D'Agostino. Finish your mission." Instead, she kissed him. It was a desperate, violent collision of months of repressed tension, of shared danger, of 2 people from warring tribes finding the only other person on earth who understood the weight they carried. Lorenzo kissed her back with a hunger that bordered on fury. He lifted her onto the heavy mahogany library table, pushing aside stacks of leather-bound books. This wasn't romance. It was a reckoning. It was fire meeting gasoline. Outside the doors, guards were scrubbing blood from the floor. Inside, the son of the victor and the daughter of the vanquished were waging their own war, trying to consume each other before the world tore them apart. The sound of the heavy brass lock disengaging echoed through the library like a hammer striking an anvil. It was a sharp, mechanical click that shattered the heated, desperate atmosphere between them. Lorenzo and Alicia sprang apart as if physically burned. Alessia slid off the mahogany table, her feet finding the Persian rug, her hands moving instinctively to smooth the wrinkles in her black dress, though her chest was still heaving for air. Lorenzo didn't retreat. He stepped forward, placing his broad frame directly between the door and the woman who, moments ago, had admitted to being his family's oldest enemy. His right hand hovered near the waistband of his trousers, fingers twitching toward the grip of his sidearm. The double doors groaned inward. It wasn't a squad of hitmen. It wasn't Luca. Don Salvatore Moretti stood on the threshold. He looked deceptively frail, leaning heavily on his black cane with the silver wolf's head handle. His other hand was tucked deep into the pocket of his woolen robe. To a stranger, he looked like a grandfather wandering the halls unable to sleep. But Lorenzo knew better. He saw the way his father's feet were planted, solid, balanced, ready. He saw the clarity in the old man's eyes, the fog of nostalgia, the wheezing coughs, the senile rants about Wynette was all gone. Salvatore didn't look at the gun Lorenzo was guarding. He didn't look at the disarray of the books on the table. He looked past his son's shoulder, locking eyes directly with Alessia. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, for 10 agonizing seconds. The only sound was the distant wail of sirens approaching the estate, a reminder of the violence that had just occurred in the dining room. "I knew it was the eyes," Salvatore rasped. His voice was low, devoid of the theatrical anger he had displayed at dinner. This was the voice that had ordered the deaths of rival families in the 90s. Cold, factual. "I never forget a set of eyes, especially not those." He stepped into the room, the cane tapping a slow, rhythmic beat on the hardwood floor. Tap, step, step, tap, step, tap. "Step, Papa," Lorenzo warned, his voice tight with tension. "Stay back." Salvatore ignored his son entirely. He kept walking until he was 10 feet away, staring at Alessia with a mixture of clinical curiosity and ancient respect. "Matteo D'Agostino," Salvatore murmured, savoring the name like a bitter wine. He was called Uicacciatu, the frozen wolf. He had eyes like cracked ice pale blue, almost white in the center. "When you looked at me in the restaurant, Pizzeria, when you told me to breathe, I saw Matteo looking back at me." Alessia stepped out from behind Lorenzo's protection. Her chin was high, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "He was my father. I know. Salvatore nodded slowly. I killed him. The confession hung in the air, naked and brutal. Lorenzo flinched, bracing for Alessia to lunge, but she stood her ground, trembling not with fear, but with the sheer effort of restraining her rage. I know, Alessia replied, her voice shaking. I remember the smoke. I remember the sound of your men laughing in the courtyard while my house burned. Salvatore tilted his head. And yet, you are here, serving me tea, reading me the Corriere della Sera, helping me up the stairs. He took another step closer, his truck-like gaze boring into her. A man does not survive 50 years in this life by being blind, girl. I suspected the moment you spoke the Prizzi dialect. Only the old families know those rhythms. It is a language of ghosts. I had Luca dig deeper. We found the crack in your armor. The real Sienna Rossi died in a car wreck in Ohio 8 years ago. You are a phantom wearing a dead girl's name. Lorenzo stared at his father, stunned. You knew all this time, and you let her stay. I wanted to see, Salvatore said softly, shifting his gaze to his son for the first time. I wanted to see if she had the stomach for it. He looked back at Alicia. You had 50 chances, Alicia D'Agostino. You stood behind me with a heavy teapot. You could have crushed my skull. You mixed my medicine. You could have stopped my heart with a single extra dose of foxglove. Tonight, in the dining room, you had a gun in your hand. You could have let that assassin put a bullet in me, then killed him. No one would have known. Salvatore's lips curled into a faint, terrifying smile. But you didn't. You saved me. Why? I don't know, Alessia whispered, the admission tearing out of her. I wanted to hate you. I do hate you. But when I saw you were just an old man scared of dying alone, hate is a fuel that burns fast, Salvatore philosophized, his voice turning raspy again. If you do not use it, it turns to ash in your mouth. You waited too long, little one. The waitress killed the assassin. Slowly, deliberately, Salvatore pulled his hand from his robe pocket. Lorenzo's hand dropped to his gun instantly, the metal cool against his palm, but Salvatore didn't draw a weapon. He withdrew a clenched fist and held it out toward Alessia. Open your hand, he commanded. Alessia hesitated, glancing at Lorenzo. He gave a microscopic nod. She extended her hand, palm up, trembling slightly. Salvatore dropped a heavy object into her palm. It was cold metal. Alessia looked down. It was a large, tarnished silver ring. The signet was worn down by time, but the engraving was still visible, a soaring hawk clutching a bundle of arrows. The crest of the D'Agostino family. A gasp escaped her throat. She traced the metal with her thumb, tears finally spilling over her lashes. I took that off Matteo's finger 20 years ago, in the ruins of your villa, Salvatore said, his tone devoid of sentiment. I kept it as a trophy, a reminder that even the strongest wolves can be trapped. Now I give it back. He straightened up, leaning back on his cane, looking suddenly very tired. The debt is paid. You saved my life tonight. I return your name. We are even. Lorenzo stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. You think giving her ring fixes this? She's a D'Agostino, Papa. Half our organization will want her head on a spike just for existing. The other half will want her dead because she infiltrated the inner circle. Exactly, Salvatore snapped, his eyes flashing with a sudden sharp intensity. This is your test, Lorenzo. Not the spreadsheets, not the politicians you buy. This, he pointed a gnarled finger at Alessia, then at Lorenzo. You have invited a ghost into our house. A ghost trained to kill. A ghost with every reason to slit our throats while we sleep. And now, Salvatore looked at the disheveled clothes, the flushed skin, the undeniable electricity between them. Now you are sleeping with the enemy. I can handle her, Lorenzo said, his voice like steel, stepping closer to Alessia again, his shoulder brushing hers. That is not handling, Salvatore barked. That is weakness. You think with your heart, not your head. You see a beautiful woman. I see a loaded gun on the bedside table. Can you control her, Lorenzo, or will I wake up tomorrow to find my only son dead because he thought love could cure a vendetta? It's not weakness to recognize strength, Lorenzo shot back, his voice rising to match his father's. He reached down and took Alessia's hand, the hand holding the ring and interlaced fingers with hers. It was a defiant, unbreakable gesture. The old wars are over, Papa. We killed them all. We won. But look at us. We're alone in a fortress, fighting off scavengers like Varney. We need new blood. We need strength that doesn't come from a payroll. He looked at Alessia, then back at his father. She saved us. She chose to save us. That's worth more than 20 years of bad blood. If we keep fighting ghosts, we become ghosts ourselves. Salvatore stared at their joined hands. The silence in the library was absolute. It felt as though the spirits of the dead, the Morettas and the D'Agostinos, were watching from the shadows, waiting for the verdict. The old Don looked at Lorenzo's face, hard, determined, unyielding. Then he looked at Alessia, who was clutching the ring but standing beside his son like a queen beside a king. A strange sound broke the silence. It was a dry, rattling noise. Salvatore was laughing. Modern times, he muttered, shaking his head. My son sleeps with the daughter of the wolf. They eat deconstructed lasagna. They rewrite the rules. He turned slowly, the rubber tip of his cane squeaking on the floor, and began to shuffle toward the door. If she kills you, Lorenzo, Salvatore called out without looking back, do not expect me to avenge you. I will be too busy laughing in my villa in Palermo. I will tell the ghosts I told you so. He paused at the open door, his hand on the frame. He looked back at Alessia one last time. The malice was gone, replaced by a weary acceptance. Tomorrow morning, Pisarita, he croaked, make the Canarino again. But this time, put a little honey in it. The bitterness, it is too much for an old man to swallow. With that, Don Salvatore Moretti walked out into the hallway, his cane tapping away into the darkness. The door clicked shut, leaving them alone in the quiet aftermath. Lorenzo let out a breath he felt he had been holding for a lifetime. The adrenaline crashed out of him, leaving him shaking. He turned to Alessia. She was staring at the closed door, clutching the heavy silver ring to her chest. He let us live, she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. He knew everything, and he let us live. He let us try, Lorenzo corrected gently. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. Do you understand what this means, Alessia? There is no going back to Ohio. There is no Siena Rossi anymore. I know, she breathed. Half the world is going to come for us, Lorenzo continued, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. My captains won't accept you. Your father's old enemies will come out of the woodwork to finish the job. We are going to be fighting for our lives every single day. Alessia looked down at the ring in her hand, the symbol of her lost heritage. Then she looked up at Lorenzo, the symbol of her future. The fear that had defined her life for 20 years finally evaporated. In its place was something hotter, sharper, and far more dangerous. A slow, confident smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a predator who had finally realized she didn't need to hide in the tall grass anymore. She slipped the silver hawk ring onto her finger. It was loose, but she made a fist and it held fast. Let them come, she said softly. They've never met a ghost before. Lorenzo pulled her into his arms, kissing her forehead, then her lips. They stood in the wreckage of their family's history, bound by blood, secrets, and a lethal attraction. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a declaration of war against the world. And as the sirens wailed closer outside the gates, Lorenzo knew one thing for certain. Together, they were going to burn the whole city down. And that, everyone, is the story of how a shy waitress with a secret dialect brought the most powerful mafia don to his knees and stole his son's heart in the process. It's a reminder that sometimes the quietest people in the room are the ones carrying the heaviest ammunition. What did you think of Alicia's revelation? Did Salvatore let them off too easy? Or did he just realize that Lorenzo and Alicia together were unstoppably dangerous? Let me know your theories down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into mafia romance and high-stakes drama, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with a friend who loves a good plot twist, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next story. Until next time, keep watching the shadows. You never know who's hiding there.